this out with someone else once, and it what it ends up doing is when it records it, it saves the copy of the conversation where you can go and download it later. It sends it to both parties. So
okay.
Okay, so first, let me first start by saying I want to do these conversations where I talk to people, and what I want to do is I want to reach out to people, and I don't want to just have conversations on the internet, because when you just like talk through texting, there's a detachment, and there's a lack of real human connection. So it's kind of really hard to feel any real attachment to anybody, right? So it's easier to be callous. It's easier to be cruel to others because you don't perceive an actual human on the other side. For all you know, it's AI, very good AI that you're having a conversation with. So having conversations that are more or less face to face, it is easier to humanize the other person. So that's one of my goals with this conversation, or and other conversations I hope to have in the future.
Can I give you my take on that, on what you're saying?
I'm sorry?
Can I give you my take on that, on what you're saying?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because if I do this with my headphones, do I sound closer or something? I'm just wondering why my sound is so bad for you.
Well, it's just not the best speaker. Yeah.
Oh, it's the speaker. It's not me then. It's
no, okay. No, it's yeah.
Okay, well, all right. We'll get back to that then. It's a little bit like when you're driving a car. You're in a bubble. You're sort of like you don't have that the physicality of other human beings. Okay, so I think things like Twitter are sort of like I think they're the Jungian shadow being put in the light, in a sense. You know, where people get to represent their brain without the danger of physical retaliation. And I think there's a little bit of a higher resolution of self-representation, but at the cost of like you say, this physical intimacy business. Text is very.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no. Text is low resolution, no matter how eloquent you are. Because you can err to either side on guessing the intent of people, you know.
Yeah. For example, you can't detect tone, right? You don't really know if someone's joking, if someone's angry, if someone's serious. As a kid, well, I say kid, as a teenager, texting with people I was close to, I really couldn't tell what they were. What the tone was, and sometimes I would take things the wrong way, and when sometimes people just don't text for hours at a time, and then you just focus on that last message, that really can morph into something that is not. So you might go crazy over a single text because you just don't know what they really meant. And another thing is there's also body language too, right? So being there in person, that definitely changes it a lot. What you're talking about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, my first reaction to this conversation that we're having is that I'm so used to using my phone to watch things that I'm forgetting that you're actually talking to me occasionally because I'm so used to looking at the screen. And I'm just noticing for seeing we're talking about the subject of talking and communication and certain aspects of detail when it comes to communication, how there are so many different layers with which we communicate. Language isn't just words. That I just noticed that occasionally I'm like, this person's talking to me. There's a couple of times I had that. That was all. I just thought, just noticed.
It can be quite a trip sometimes, I suppose, too. Yeah. So the thing you're talking about being in the car, I have heard that comparison of kind of like road rage, right? So people get road rage in their cars. They don't really personify the other individual. They're just they can't put themselves in the other person's shoes. All they know is this person's making me angry, So yeah, it's very easy to lose sight of reality, because your reality is in the moment, and reality is perception. Of course, your perception is very limited in a vehicle, right? So yeah, that's what I'm trying to accomplish is more or less face-to-face conversation. You're really getting to know others. That said, I don't know barely anything about you. So I'd like to do proper introductions. So tell me about yourself.
I'm 46. I'm quite short. That's first impressions, I would guess. What can I say? I come from England. I have a couple of children. I had a really difficult time growing up. I had a single mum who was only 15 when she was born, and a grandmother whose husband had killed himself. So I was around a lot of spontaneous emotions. I never quite knew where and who I was. We moved around a lot. And then my mum got married, and I kind of didn't belong to her new family, and I kind of dropped out, really. And yeah, I was so insecure. I had an awful posture, drink and drugs and various other comforting occupations that keep you from building anything representing a foundation. I thought I was a bloody idiot for the first 2 decades until I read my first book, which was Lord of the Flies, around the age of 22. And ever since then, I've had the impression that I'm catching on to the idea I'm intelligent, although I never quite feel smart enough to do anything with it. It's kind of weird. And in the last 20 years, I've been working as a postman. One of my children has a rare brain syndrome. He lost all his language, so that's been keeping us very busy. So I'm quite philosophical. I believe that I just want to say I'm very kind, and I care a lot about people, and I have massive theories about saving the world that I really believe I should be talking into action, which is why I went for your invitation of a conversation. I believe that if you speak your mind, like-minded people know you exist. It has to be that way, and I don't think anybody's 100% like-minded. It can't possibly be true. We've all had different inputs, different emotional states when we've had different inputs. There is no way we're going to have a consensus of identical, because we're all fundamentally unique.
It doesn't need to be, though, does it? It doesn't need to be a perfect consensus at all.
Well, I'll give you my worldview on that very quickly, because I do stuff on stage. I do poetry and stuff, and one of the things I do on stage is I point out that the world is round. If everybody pointed up, we'd all be pointing somewhere else. If everybody pointed down, we'd all be pointing to the center of the planet. We can agree on down. That's it. My grounding philosophy, basically.
Nice play on words. So that's interesting. So tell me, first off, how did you come across my invitation? So how did you? Go ahead.
I don't really have any discipline when it comes to Twitter. I was very late in the game coming to Twitter. I tried it on and off every now and then, but when you come into a kind of, you get your first sting from somebody who completely misunderstands you, mm-hmm. and then you feel the need to defend yourself. So you go around being a little bit cocky, and then you start provoking people, and you start to feel superior and all this sort of stuff. It's really weird, and I can't remember you specifically, because like I say, I kind of hop. If I like one person's thing, I'll have a look at somebody who commented, and before you know what's happened, I found them somehow like that. So I've really randomly collected a whole bunch of people that I follow, because I kind of like I say, I think I'm looking for the conversation too. That's all I can say. I found you because I'm also looking for conversation. Okay, I can't even remember what the subject was that got us talking.
I I don't remember either, but what I do want to ask is that some of your solutions to some of the world's problems that hopefully others share, and I think that, to be honest, there are a lot of good solutions out there that we're not sharing, and partly because we're afraid of the consequences. And I think maybe even possibly the majority might go along with these solutions. They might share them themselves. It might have occurred to them, some of these solutions, but because of fear of repercussion, they've essentially defaulted to being the silent majority. And I certainly see that in the trans community. So first off, like, you do know that I'm transgender, right? If you
No, I have no idea. No.
Okay.
And now I know. I just feel nothing but hatred and rejection, and I don't feel you know. I'm joking. I sincerely, like, for God's sake, you people need like as much cultural acceptance as possible. But the interactive cost of threat that a lot of the trans the people who claim to speak for transgenderism, the aggressive behaviour towards women, it's a hell of a subject, and I care intensely and immensely. So no, it's nice to hear that you are. Great, fine, good. I didn't know that that you'd be bringing that extra level of relevance to the discussion, because I feel like an outsider to the issue, but I care, and I'm a cis white man kind of shit,
Yeah, so I don't give two shits about your intersectional status. I don't care how many points you have, because it's irrelevant to me. It's the idea that you don't have a right to comment on something because you're not involved in it directly, I think it's a huge fallacy. The fact is actually
stay in your lane philosophy is just like fuck off. You can't be open borders and have people in lanes.
Right. So you look at it like this, like there's objectivity, right? I am subjective to being in my own experience. I'm not able to see it perhaps as clearly as you might. So it's good to be able to reflect after talking with others who might be able to say, yeah, this is what I've seen. This is what I'm seeing coming from you, from your community, whether you like it or not. This is what others are seeing too, and you have to deal with that. You have to confront that, right? So I myself have sort of taken that outsider perspective, because for quite some time I sort of backed off from the trans community, and I didn't want to. I didn't really want to be involved at all with the trans community, because it's just being around so many people in the community. It can be toxic. It can eat at your self-esteem. There are a lot of opinions about how you should live your life, and so. And for me, once you start passing, people generally just tend to withdraw. They're like, well, I've done as much as I can do now. Why do I need to be involved with them? Why do I need their help, right? So we just withdraw and we go stealth. My reasons for going stealth weren't quite so much, but for quite some time I did withdraw, and then I've started to see from outsiders, hey, this is what's going on. What are they doing? And I'm like, wait, what? We've been doing this? They're like, yeah, y'all have been doing this for quite some time. Really?
Can I interrupt with a comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, you're talking about withdrawing, and the process that we're involved with is a sense of coming out at the same time. We're coming out as people who withdraw.
Sure.
Do you see how there's like yeah, I mean, I think I said it really. Yeah, we're coming out as people who withdraw. We're letting people know we're letting people who withdraw know that people are withdrawing. I think we're in the majority. People withdraw because what you were saying earlier about people don't want to submit their ideas or their conversation because they're afraid of whether like hellfire retributions and all this sort of stuff. I think most people are like that because they don't know what's required of them.
Right.
We come part way into the story of the planet at all times. Everybody inherits the world from their perspective, and then we're expected to be agents of some kind? It's a really deep existential question where I think the trans issue, the reason why I find it so deeply interesting is because it's got something to do with the psychological connection to the materialism of time and life itself. It's really deep. This idea that gender is some kind of like constraint that's been constructed, as opposed to some emergent property of cultural repetition over centuries that's just been lived out by people who were scared of retributions for speaking out. You know, it's almost like there's a massive truth revolution pending, because it's better than a violent one where people are lashing out because they can't represent themselves properly.
Well, that's kind of true, but it's also kind of gone the other way too, right? So there is a truth revolution, but there's also it's gone backwards in many ways. So that instead of being a revolution where we are strongly in pursuit of truth, surely a lot of us are really reflecting, looking inwards, right? But at the same time, it's gone to the point where we've lost perspective and we're no longer looking inwards. We're looking through something and beyond, to the point of delusion. We're starting to see things that aren't there. So, for example,
the unicorns have come back, basically.
Right, exactly. And the thing is, it's not just that we're seeing these unicorns, but now we're telling others that they have to see those unicorns too. And if they don't see those unicorns, then we take action against them. We're like, no, these unicorns really exist, and they absolutely have to admit it. And so one of the hashtags I use. Go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say one of the hashtags I use online is hashtag There Are Four Lights. I don't know if you ever saw Star Trek: The Next Generation, but there was an episode where Captain Picard has been captured and interrogated by the Cardassians, who are space Nazis, and they tried to brainwash him into seeing five lights when there are actually four lights. And so I use this as a metaphor, or like a reference to that, because it is kind of brainwashing. We insist that people not only humor us, humor in some cases delusions, and I mean actual delusions. Like, not all trans people are valid, not all people with identity crises are valid, but not only are we humoring them, or others have to humor us, but they actually have to start to believe it, and they have to. It has to manifest in all aspects. So if you catch someone even privately misgendering someone, well, then that's a hate crime right there. It's gotten so absurd that even a private conversation is not allowed. We're talking about really strong Orwellian control mechanisms. Speaking of which, okay, so you grew up in Britain. What part?
The South, Brighton.
Okay.
Part of town, university town.
Okay, so London for some time has been a bit of a dystopia. They've had surveillance for as long as I can remember. Cameras on every street. My parents were telling me about this as a kid. Like, you don't want to go there. There's mass government surveillance, and it's only gotten worse over the years. But it's not just that kind of surveillance. It's also to the point where there is thought control. The police will come to your house because they heard that you might be transphobic, something like that. It's gotten really, really bad. Every day I'm getting more news about how bad it's gotten. So I think that you got out in time.
Well, I moved to Sweden 20 years ago.
That was a smart move.
Yeah, I didn't know it was a smart move. I'd like to pretend I was onto something. But yeah, well, you mentioned Orwell in reference to after you said about the next generation. There's something in 1984 about. Have you read any Orwell?
So that was a book that my school was supposed to cover, and then they decided that they didn't want to cover it. They did cover Brave New World, and I think that I remember someone saying that the lights was also in Orwell's 1984 as well.
The lead character is tortured into believing that 2 and 2 make 5.
Okay, so yeah,
He has to believe that 5 fingers being held up. This sort of like driving people to see, down is up, up is down. But I mentioned that as well, because when you were talking about that everybody has to see the unicorns too, that's kind of what I meant by this, and this using the idea that the world is round. If everybody pointed up, we'd all be pointing somewhere else. The unicorns are up for these people. That's where the up is. They see it as some kind of like open-minded liberation expression, and any disagreement is seen as fascism. And
right. So
it's really see that dynamic.
So this is neo-Puritanism, and what we're talking about is essentially heresy. So it is the practice is exactly a religious practice, and it's actually become dangerous because obviously it's very dogmatic too, but there are laws and rituals that go along with this. And so what we're looking at essentially is the rise in this dystopia. In all Western countries, it seems little by little it's happening almost uniformly, just taking time to make it happen. But we're looking at a theocracy that's growing, and that's very dangerous. I'm opposed to theocracies. I'm very much a lefty, but I'm also libertarian.
Right.
And I have zero tolerance for theocracies.
I have it that my heart is on the left and my head is on the right. Because it's got, the conservatism shares the same root as the word conservation. I care about the planet. We should conserve it. Right. If we're going to save the planet, which should be for humanity and not from it. These are very important distinctions to be made, and making distinctions for a lot of people is the same as what's the word? Well, as discrimination.
Right.
I mean, people are so afraid of discrimination, they don't realize how terrifying the indiscriminate is.
So if you're part of an in-group, you're allowed to discriminate because you're discriminating against the ones that are intolerable. You're doing it for the good of the tribe. However, you're not allowed to do that from within towards your own. Only when you're identifying those that are real threats that are not of your own. And
it's always been of tribes and groups ever since. It's about the containment area of the safe space, inside the castle walls, inside the garden walls, inside the fortress, inside the state. These are psychological manifestations.
Right.
In and out.
So it didn't used to be this bad. It didn't used to be this bad. I remember as a kid growing up, I think the first time I became more social or like politically woke was during the Clinton era, and it was actually at Waco. Are you familiar with the Waco incident?
Yeah. Bill Hicks did some good comedy about that.
Okay. Well, my parents were actually kind of still are very conservative Christians. My mother grew up Southern Baptist. My father actually grew up, I don't remember what his family religion was, but it was a Christian Protestant, but he ended up going from that to pagan to it was atheist and then pagan and then Anglican and then Catholic, but basically very conservative Christian. And one of the things that was very prevalent at that time, it still kind of is among the Mormons, is this fear of the government, this fear that the government would end up using its powers to basically bully people into cooperating and shaping them into a very particular kind of society. And the thing is, at that time, I didn't believe most any of that, although these days I'm seeing it. But what I've noticed is it doesn't quite happen from the top down. It actually starts from the bottom up. So there's been a grassroots movement going on over the years that has infiltrated levels of like higher education, for example, and big tech platforms, and little by little, it has radically changed the landscape, the political landscape especially, and of course, with candidates like Trump getting involved, it's ramped things up significantly. It's ramped up the rhetoric and the divide, and it's made a lot of the fear mongering that my parents had made seem prescient.
Yeah.
So now I actually am concerned. For some time I wasn't, but now the way it's gone, it's led towards. It seems like there's a driving force to homogenize culture. For example, one of those things I see is the control of not just religion, which we do see, which is what was a huge part of what my parents were worried about, but also language as well. And so, for example, with the whole trans thing, there's a huge push to make language gender neutral, even in Germany, which is a very gendered language. So when you control language, you can control culture. So there are, of course, not just gender neutral words, but other words that we're not allowed to say. For example, I'm not supposed to say the word tranny because it's offensive. Now, if you're a tranny, you should probably be fine with it. Most are, but it's derogatory to some, so they don't want you to use it, right? But there's a lot of language that you just aren't allowed to say. You're not allowed to say women are women and men are not women. Now, that's a statement.
Sorry, but you are a very thoughtful and interesting person, and when you speak, you remind me a lot of things I think of, and then I become aware that I'm building up loads and loads of things I want to say.
Oh, I'm so sorry. No, go ahead. Yeah.
Listen,
I don't mean to dominate the conversation. My apologies.
This is no. This is far from a criticism. This is purely an analysis. It's something that I completely accept, and I want you to understand that I totally accept that, because it's actually what I think is the importance of the conversation. Is that if you admit to observations like that, it means that you are being an active participant. It's fine. It's sincerely not a problem. But it's exciting for me because I'm going, oh, I've got something I can say to this as well. So if you don't mind, I'm going to try and remember quite a lot of what I'm saying, and it will demonstrate that I have been listening to you whilst you've been doing that as well. Firstly, on the Branch Davidian thing, I mentioned the comedian Bill Hicks. He talked about there were tanks shooting fire into the building. They saw it. They saw the live footage of it. They showed that state power exists. I mean, the Chinese have a saying, which is the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. I think in the West, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down sometimes. It's a bit different. I think that's why I think we still have something. I think there's still this freedom thing exists. I'm just going to say about Thomas Jefferson's invention of the separation of church and state when it comes to theocracy and the power of the government over theocracy, is that he got a letter from a Christian sect saying that they were being persecuted, and he looked into the case and he found out that they were being persecuted by another Christian sect, and the freedom of religion was a thing. And he was like, well, if I take a side, the state is endorsing a religion. So I will not take a side. You guys are on your own. Sort it out between you. We will protect your right to worship. And that's how the separation of church and state came about. And that was the evolution of the secular idea. All religions underneath the state. That's what happened. In the Middle East, I've been listening to talks from like ex-Muslims and stuff like this. They have more of a sort of sectarian legal system. If you're a girl that tries to escape your family, other family members will travel and look for you and kidnap you, and the government won't do anything about it because you'll start a tribal war between different religions. So that's why we're better off with the secular state, I believe, anyway. I certainly see if all the monotheisms are right about God, but God is so complicated that nobody can fully understand, and the scholars are arguing, theocrats are obviously disingenuous idiots. And I don't mean that to be rude. I mean that because, but all the religions have the same sort of core idea of tribalism and universality. And I see them as a contained space as well. If you just join with us and we expand over the entire planet, the whole planet will be right because God said it's this way. But this is one thing about theocrats, is that they're always doing this. They're pointing to their up, all right? And with that in mind, move on to the next thing, which is this thing about language. The word author, authoritarian, to speak with authority, it means to speak as an author of your own words, to sort of represent what you mean. And I think that quite a lot of this freedom pursuit over the years, the centuries, has put people in a position where they have this freedom but no orientation. You need to have a goal. You need to aim for something. That way your body recognizes what achievements are. I think we're fine-tuned to actually find our mutual agreements, which means we're kind of set up to live in an honest way, which is why this encroaching authoritarianism, which is a kind of like a rehash of the original best things that have ever been said, but repeated ad infinitum by sycophants, has created this intensity. And this one of the key words in this intersectional stuff is diversity, right? Well, right. If diversity has to mean anything, it has to mean all human beings, or it doesn't mean diversity. How on earth can you be exclusive from an inclusivity movement? You can't be. It is actually wrong. If trans women are women, then women are trans women. That doesn't work. There's nothing going on here. There are distinctions to be made that aren't prejudicial. The word I forgot earlier. The word I mentioned earlier. Judgment, negative judgments. They're not discrimination.
Yeah.
The language unfortunately does have a lot of culture to it, attached to it, and rebelling against culture is something culture always does. I mean, how can culture be anything else? It's never been a friend. It's always been evolving with every new brain. What can we do about that apart from, realize that time and materialism pushes us from behind like a Mario game, scrolling from left to right? Or it's either we go forward or we die arguing about who started history.
Mm.
Rant over. Your turn to speak.
Right. So, let's talk about language. One of the things that I've noticed is our language used to be a lot more sophisticated, and that led to a greater sophistication of thought. I've also noticed that our language has it's become, I don't know what the antonym of sophisticated is, but it's become simpler over time. Right? It's simplified, and I partly blame media for it, actually. Well, let's put it this way. I think what allowed language to become more sophisticated is readership. People read a lot more, and they had to increase their vocabulary. But we don't read as much. We watch more, and whatever we do read is written generally for the common man, right? So we read articles that aren't written in complicated language. We're not like reading scientific papers. Some of us do, but generally we're reading simple articles written at like a 5th grade level, right? Or I'm not sure what it's like in Britain, but very, very low vocabulary. And so because it uses very unsophisticated language, it's also unsophisticated thought, how do I say, thought potential, like different, I guess, matrices in your mind that allow you to create more elaborate, complicated models in your head, right? And so the simpler it is, the easier it is to control. And this is partly done because, we have visual media, we have like television, internet, and all of it uses simpler language, right? And then, of course, by creating the internet itself, it has allowed us to connect with people far and wide. And what we're seeing is that there is the internet used to be sort of the Wild West, and it's actually become a lot tamer. There are suddenly rules in place. You can't use certain language. You can't just do whatever you want anymore. Now there are consequences. Now there are governments saying what you can and can't have on your platform, right? So we're seeing an exchange of culture take place faster. Culture's evolving and sort of regressing at the same time on a broader scale. Like all the Anglophonic countries are more or less getting on the same page. Where memes are a great example. Memes are a really great example of this. It allows us to convey a lot of information in a short amount of time, right? And so we're seeing people in New Zealand and in Australia and like I said, all the other Anglophonic countries involved, they're privy to language that used to be more specific to other countries, and so it's kind of gotten us on the same page. And now that we're all on the same page, and that it makes it so much easier to affect us or infect us with mind viruses. So the infiltration of higher education, college campuses, controlling how people talk, think, the gender-neutral pronouns just being part of it. It's all over the Anglophonic countries. It's also all over the West, but it's very prominent in Anglophonic countries. And so many of the crazier ideas coming from the gender studies departments are making it into mainstream culture, and it's because the internet exists, right? We're also seeing at the same time, parallel to a lot of this, is more people are coming out as transgender. Why is that? Again, it's because the internet has connected us more. So we're seeing a lot of patterns increasing and become more widespread because the internet has done a very good job of putting us all on the same page. It's almost like we occupy the same space now, where we didn't before. So then you bring in like all those language controls, all the thought policing, and it makes it so much easier to control what we could even comprehend, right? So even the concept of having borders, right? Suddenly we're hearing, it sounds like there's becoming more and more of a consensus all around the world that maybe borders don't need to exist. Of course, I have a problem with that. Texas being a border state, and now I live in the Valley of the Sun, Arizona, so that's another border state. I do believe in borders. I don't believe in unchecked migration because we have closed systems, right? We have finite resources. We also have a homeless problem, and if you don't keep your immigration in check, then well, if you don't take care of your homeless, but you want to take care of the immigrants that come over here, well, then what are you saying to your own people, right? But that's a different discussion altogether. Point being I'm
starting to get the feeling now. That's been a lot of things you've been talking about, and now I'm with you. But we started off on language, and now we're on immigration.
Sorry, that's
no. You're
to get sidetracked. But
I'm riding the same train of thought though. And so let me just backtrack on this one a little bit. With regards to borders, we're trying to deal with people who draw the line at having them. That's that's a really like contradictory mess. I think that's one of the problems. We're typing 1 when they're typing 0, but to give you an analogy, the problem is what this global culture idea is doing is turning paradoxes into ultimatums. Like here's a story. Remember a few years back there was this protest to do with the Standing Rock. The Standing Rock tribal people. They had this pipeline going through their reservation. We're just casually breaking another promise. Meanwhile, we really care. Here's Thanksgiving and all this sort of stuff. And I really deeply felt that business. I really deeply felt it. I actually have a rock. I picked up a rock off the side of the road and I wrote Standing Rock on it and I stood it up. And I thought, and now I have that in my home on the window ledge. It just says Standing Rock and it's standing up. There was just something very deeply true about that I really liked. The rocks laying freely on the ground, you stand them up. That's an action. You do something. And now I have this living in my peripheral vision every day I'm alive. And it's there next to the Buddha and the Russian dolls I have and the socialist nutcracker. Sorry, my window ledge. Anyway, so the Standing Rock protest was happening, and there was a tribal leader who referred to the pipeline as the Great Snake, or the Black Snake, he called it, which, as analogies go, as deep, poetical, spiritual, belonging, terror analogies go, calling an oil pipeline the Black Snake is astonishing. The Black Snake wriggling across our land, spitting its venom into the sky, biting and infecting the bloodstream and brain channels of our leaders. The Black Snake is poisoning the Middle East. The Black Snake is getting our children's lungs. The Black Snake is causing the plastics that are drowning the turtles. It's like, holy fucking shit, the Black Snake. That's awesome. Anyway, they had this slogan, which is "Water is life," and you're like going, yes, water is life. But at the same time, on the other side of the planet, in the Mediterranean, people were drowning, trying to escape war. Now, if you took those protesters with their signs saying "Water is life" and just moved them 10 hours in the direction and put them on the south coast of Europe, they're a bunch of cruel, sadistic motherfuckers. This is the truth of context. Now, what happened? Did they cross a border? A context is framed by a border. The distinction is obvious. Obviously, I care about both things. Mm-hmm. So I wrote a song about it. I'm gonna perform a song for you. It's very short. Don't panic. It goes like this: we are dwelling in a spectrum between A and B. We've inherited an eternity, yet its extremities we see, and somewhere in the middle, custodians are we, with a centre at the centre of our lives. Water is life, but not to the drowning. Water is life, but not to the drowning. That's it.
Well, this is kind of reminiscent of that one quote, like "water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink." Right. So, yeah. So it's almost poetic how both of those things are going on at the same time. But
I would say it's actually poetic, because if we do away with poetry because we're so fundamentally intent on building language as if it's some kind of coherent operating system so we can interact with the AI better, because the AI has been programmed to turn the world into a super massively safe corporate mall for everybody to talk as consumers should. Fuck off. Don't they must expect the beast to rage. They must. If they do this kind of stuff, they have to expect the beast to rage.
So the question would be, if they do? What if that is factored into the plan?
Well, there's that saying about the military. The problem with the military is that they're a hammer, so they see every problem as a nail.
Right.
Statecraft is something that's evolved over time on a world that started off flat, and you could banish people and they never came back. The world is round. People can't fuck off. They can only go somewhere else and regroup and find like-minded or hostile ones. And it's like, you know, we have to step into the next dimension now. And I don't mean that in a hippy-dippy shit kind of way. I mean that as a very, very fully integrated, undoubtedly materialist world. Science is the mapping of materialism. Everything outside of the map is, you know, inside our minds. And if we represent those and test them in the validity of a physical world, and they provide unquestionably positive things for people, then I honestly believe it will get addictive. We talk openly about world peace and talk it into existence. I think we've accidentally given ourselves a really shitty outlook and perspective because we numbered the world wars. World War One, World War Two, and then we wait. You know, we've got a narrative there, and I think that all the states are expanding with their you know, their corporate tendrils now. It's not the same as like invading armies, but you know, but they're tickling each other, or they're raping each other, or they're, you know, there's some kind of thing. But I think the age of a singular hegemony is over, and people are panicking because, like the East-West divide, that was a better narrative, you know, and the narrative's fallen apart, and we need to tell stories about how the narrative fell apart, if you know what I mean.
So, I'm not sure where to go then. Like, what do we have in our future as far as? So, what would it be like to be on that other dimension, or how can we solve this in a way that is going to be that all parties involved, or at least most practical, rational parties involved, are going to be satisfied? Because what I'm seeing is some very smart people have succumbed to this really stupid tribalism. So, and some of them can be selectively irrational. It's kind of weird. Like in most every other aspect of their lives, they are perfectly rational people with some very good solutions. But when it comes to certain subjects, they're deal breakers, and they break down into complete irrational loons, right? So
belief is a force of nature, and I think you need to meet it with belief.
So, I mean, what we're seeing is belief is a force of nature, so you need to shut down the other beliefs. That seems to be the way it's gone.
I don't think it has to be that, because I think that because it certainly looks like we have free will. So what we believe is our choice to represent, and it's how we represent it. What we believe is possible and impossible. So a lot of people join in with these movements because they've succumbed to something they believe is impossible unless they join that movement.
Right.
So, you know, I learned this, like, I remember somebody, after 9/11, they just said, you've got to respect other people's beliefs. And I tried to work out for ages what that meant. I mean, what are we talking, you know, walking on water, you know, voices from, like, burning shrubs. It's like, it's all this sort of stuff. It's like, no, it's not about believing what other people believe. It's believing that they believe it. And with that in mind, that actually, you know, you don't do away with the rational with that. In fact, what you do is, rather than categorize them as irrational, you become a rational actor within an environment where people are believing as a force of nature.
I get what you're saying. It's about respecting others' beliefs. I mean, very simply. But the thing is, there are many that just don't on principle because it's their beliefs, and they believe they understand what those beliefs mean, even if they don't really. So even just the idea of going a step further to investigate, what do they really believe? Let's ask them, what do you believe? Because you'll get an impression in your own head, this is what they believe. But when you want to go and investigate that, people tell you, no, don't you dare do that, because then you might start believing it yourself. There's this terror that you might end up becoming infected with their ideology.
Or they panic because their worldview is only made up of axioms they've appropriated in order to belong.
That's a bit of a cynical view, but that's probably true.
It's certainly possible. Yeah. I'm not saying it's true across the board for absolutely everybody, but deep thought is certainly kept at bay by the panic of not belonging.
Yeah. I think that very much the ones at the top that are pulling things, the ones that are financing the activists, and there are powerful players financing some of the ones doing the changing. I think they do know better. They absolutely do know better. They do realize, for example, that some of what is going on is psychological manipulation, and they probably anticipated that certain things were going to result from that. They did it anyway, and so it's hard not to. They say that, like, what was it? Hanlon's razor is never attribute to malice that which can be easily explained by stupidity. I don't think that's I don't think that's a complete thought. I think it can also be explained by indifference. Some people just don't care. They know that something's going to come out of it. They don't care. It may not be malice. They might just be so detached from the world. And let's say you're a powerful millionaire family. It's easy to become detached from the world. So like the Soroses and the Koch brothers, these are people that have had a lot of money for a long time. So even Rupert Murdoch, he's another one of those millionaires. I don't know how long he's had his millions, but he's someone.
Oligarchs.
Right. So the oligarchs, many of them are old money. They've had money for quite some time. Even if not, they've been wealthy for quite some time, long enough that they have divorced themselves from humanity. And so they have a lot less of a stake in it, at least on a more personal level. It's more like they're trying to secure something for whatever reason. It could be vanity. Maybe they're really that sociopathic that they think that they know what's better, or they just don't care how many lives are being ruined from what they're doing, right? So I really do think
that Madeleine Albright quote about like all the people that died in Iraq was worth it kind of thing. I can't remember quite what she said, but there's a direct quote from Madeleine Albright who just, it was so self-evident that statecraft was just a case of looking at spreadsheets.
Right. Well, from my understanding, I haven't looked into it much, but that was very much the case when it came to our Civil War. General Grant basically realized that he could just throw people at the problem, and eventually he'd win. It was just a matter of numbers, whatever it took to win the war, right? So, yeah, it's when you get high enough and you gain enough power, it's very easy to lose your attachment to humanity. And so I don't trust a lot of what's going on. I don't trust the ones that are funding a lot of the crazy changes that we've been seeing as of late. And that terrifies me, because I see a lot of people are following blindly, and they don't realize that they are being used. And I hate being used, and I realize I am being used. A lot of the time I'm being used. I think it's almost impossible not to be the cog in someone's machine. And we do play many roles, but at the same time, once you realize you're being used, you do have that freedom to change that. And you should change that, at least if you realize that you're being used for the wrong purposes. Sometimes you might actually be a very good and useful tool for someone else and for a good cause. But you have to be mindful of who you're serving, ultimately. And I don't think a lot of us really care to think about like whose ends we're serving.
Mm. Well, I think there's emotionally and intellectually, there's something very threatening about the idea of larger forces using us, and that's a terrible a terrible reality to realize. I guess that was it. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, though. I'm a conspiracies theorist. I don't think the ruling class is a conspiracy theory, and I don't think all conspiracies are conspiring with each other. So there is sort of like there's that that it functions on that level as well. But I was just going to, what was it about? Yeah, there were two terrifying facts about the idea of people more powerful than us. Either they know exactly what they're doing, or they don't. They're both equally terrifying.
Right.
And with that in mind, I think what we do is that when we sense agency, we take it personally. And because it's indifferent, it doesn't have agency. So taking it personally is actually treating our mistrust as a sort of clarity map of reality. And now all of a sudden we're in fight or flight mode.
Right.
They're not doing. It isn't personal. These people sincerely don't care about you personally. Sure, their actions will lead to nasty consequences, but when those consequences happen, whether we take it personally or not, they're still happening. There's a wildlife video I saw once. It rocked me completely to my core. It was of a fish swimming really fast. It was a flying fish trying to swim away from this big fish that was going to eat it. And when it was one of these they're adding the music to it to make it more dramatic. And then the fish managed to fly out of the water, and the heroic music came in. But then it got tired, fell back in the water. Danger music, danger music, danger music. Then it flies again. But this time there were seagulls. All right? So it's either death by seagull or death by giant fish. This has never stopped being a food chain. I think the civilization has, murdered the beasts from God. There were these animals that had this big bottom jaw and these two fangs that were just absolutely perfect for sticking in the back of our head and ripping our skull out through our eyeballs. I'm glad we killed the fuckers. I'm really pleased. Well done, patriarchy. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like, we live in a world that is so different to how it could have been. And I take the fact that we're still alive as a sign of something better than, what our anxieties convince us of. Because, like I say, this idea, we've been wrestling with this since the dawn of time. How much of this is agency? How much of this is mechanisms of dead matter knocking against each other? What's the balance? And it certainly does seem to me that we appear to be the arbiters of this. I think the class struggle or the ideological struggles or the religious struggles, they're like some kind of a kind of weird Marxist kind of structure of mind versus materialism in a perpetual struggle. And that spirit of revolution, that idea of a utopia, is that either the dream that the struggle will end or the struggle's letting us know of things we can change for the better.
Yeah, I mean, it could definitely be a carrot on the stick. I certainly see that a lot with.
But who holds the stick? What do visualize the scene. If you think it's a carrot on the stick, who's holding the stick? Are they holding the stick on purpose? Who are they? Where do they stand to hold a stick? Are they? It's weird. I don't understand that one because it's like I say, I've managed to detach myself from taking the dangers of life personally because it holds me down. It slows my reactions to it.
Interesting. It's also a very skeptical perspective too.
Is it skeptical? Because you called me skeptical and cynical so far, and I don't feel I'm either. I'm skeptical in the sense of without the negative connotation to skepticism.
Well,
but I honestly don't believe
it's a distrust. It's a doubt. It's distrust, but it's not necessarily unwarranted, you know. It's something that could very well have been sort of experience has taught you to look further than just the carrot, right?
So, I'll tell you where I've had to look. My mum was a traumatized teenage girl who had to leave home at 17 with me as a 1-year-old because of the suicide of her stepfather rather. She was so emotionally challenged, I can't even begin to imagine, but she left me with a narrative that I shouldn't exist, because that's a bit of a problem. So yes, I've had to dig deep. And when you say about like language getting sophisticated, and this whole idea about the simplification via memes and all this sort of stuff, I have had to find ways to summarize in very simplistic terms what the hell I mean. And I've come up with a few things. There's nothing wrong with the universe. We're all the sperm and the egg that made it. And materialism proves that we're supposed to be here. But the search is over. Yes, we belong. Who isn't indigenous, for crying out loud? Yeah, we need to stop the fighting. Our relationship with the environment is, you know, a lot of it has been cultural inculcations. Like the idea of we're supposed to be at harmony is like some kind of Pythagorean idea that because harmony exists, it's the state we're supposed to be getting to, whereas discordance is where we learn. So, but it is a fun one. I found this one out recently. The word Israel means he who wrestles with God. Didn't know that before. He was a character, right, who had a wrestling match with God. And Islam means submission. So you wrestle or you submit. Those seems to be the options. When you're faced with the divine, when you're faced with reality, do you wrestle or do you submit? Do you accept or do you change? Dichotomy. It seems to be that we have choice. That's
right,
what
but
free
it
will
can
is.
also be a false dichotomy too. Like, why can't you just walk away? Right?
And no. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was thinking globally there. We can't, you know, as we can't walk. As they said in the '60s, and my grandmother replied, said, "Stop the world. I want to get off." She said, "Where would you go?"
Well, it's. I guess in some ways, some people use drugs to escape that world, right? So they walk into some other world, right? So let's not wrestle. Let's not submit. Let's escape into someplace else, right? But it's more like, depending on what you're wrestling with, depending on what titan or god or whatever it is you're wrestling with, it might be something that you can stop wrestling because you realize that it doesn't really exist, right? So maybe that deity is just something that your mind made up, or that something that someone, like a fictional creature that, well, let's say it like this: you're on acid. Sometimes, no, I don't. This isn't personal experience, but I have friends that do acid. This is Arizona, so there are a lot of people that get bored in the desert. But from what I've been told, if you're on an acid trip and someone tells you something, they can affect your acid trip. So what you experience on the acid trip is very real to you. This is the reason why a lot of people believe that in simulation theory, because reality is perception, and perception is something that you just create in your own mind. It doesn't have to actually be real, but so you could create this concept of God in your mind, God and the devil in your mind, and it's a very real thing for you. It was something that was suggested by someone else, but you created it in your own mind, and it's as real to you as any of the rest of the world. And it's something that's very hard to escape. But when you really realize that illusion isn't actually there, you can walk through it, right? Maybe you have more control over other things in your environment too. Maybe you realize that there is this illusion that your brain is projecting in front of you, right? So it's just food for thought.